Marjorie's journey, on a mission of her own, is a story of courage and kindness. Against the frightening backdrop of World War II, a young Scottish woman took 10 children by ship through the waters of the Atlantic from Scotland to South Africa. Here she set up a home for them called Bairnshaven. This biography is an unusual portrayal of motherhood, family, and love. Marjorie's story comes to life through diary pages, letters, telegrams, and photographs. This true story is a fresh take on the role that women played during the war, highlighting their strength and courage and focusing on hope and unconditional kindness.
Good evening and welcome to the launch of Marjorie's journey on a mission of her own. My name is Jean Findlay and I am the founder of Scotland Street Press, which publishes a number of memoirs by older women. Ailie Cleghorn, the author, had a fairly long and interesting journey herself in bringing this book to life. After sending a proposal, she came from Canada to Edinburgh to see me and discuss the book in June 2 years ago. As she talked, it struck me that it was also for her a bit of a personal mission. It was that sense of duty to bear witness to the achievement of Marjorie, who was, after all, not a famous person, but a brave and clear-sighted woman, which impressed us. So the story of Marjorie is now here before us with beautiful photographs and letters which bring to life another time and other places. It has been a truly worthwhile journey for us all here at Scotland Street Press, and now I have great pleasure in introducing Ailie. Thank you.
Marjorie was my mother's first cousin. Also born of Scottish parents, but actually born in what was then Ceylon, because her parents or her father was in the colonial service, working in the agricultural tea industry in Ceylon. Well, I'm not actually sure when I first heard about her, because when I was growing up, I know she was mentioned by my mother, but I didn't know her. And then my sister, who was 5 years older than I am, visited England often and got to know Marjorie very well. So I knew her first through her, through my sister. And then I found out more when I located that 28-page letter that Marjorie wrote in about 1980 to Sandy having been the baby on the voyage to South Africa. Well, it was a very long letter describing not only the voyage, but the preamble to the voyage and her life, her early life in Aberdeen, and living in the home of my grandparents in Aberdeen, along with my mother and my aunt. So she described her early life, which wasn't very happy because her mother had died when she was 3.5, and her father had left her with my grandparents because he had work in Canada to go to, and he left her there, not to return for 26 years. So the letter told about the journey in a very lively way. She talked about all those 10 children and about getting them from the south of England onto a train up to Glasgow, and it was as if it wasn't a problem for her. She had 10 children in tow, and it was a happy voyage. Chapter 5 starts with by train from the south of England to Glasgow, and it begins with the decision to sail out of Glasgow meant a long train journey, first from the south of England to London, then from London to Glasgow with 10 children aboard a blacked-out train. A few nights before leaving London, the promised air and submarine escort was withdrawn from the Glasgow departure point because the government could not spare them. The choice was to go or not to go. The choice was to go, although Marjorie had a lot of fear about what on earth they would encounter en route. Anyway, the plans for the journey got underway, preparing the children for the needed escape from the bombing that had already begun. Well, it began very slowly. Of course, my sister was not alive anymore to ask her more because she had died in 2009. So I just had the letter to go on and a few hints as to who was who. So I was doing some research in South Africa at the time, and I knew that Sandy, who had been the baby on the voyage, lived in Durban in South Africa. So I telephoned him and got to know him a little bit on that way. And then it went from there with more curiosity and some travel to England, to the archives out at Kew, and then eventually to a visit to Aberdeen to find out where Marjorie had lived, where my grandparents had lived in Aberdeen, and visit to the school that Marjorie had attended when she was very little, and. So I just sort of followed my nose. I guess the most remarkable thing is how remarkable Marjorie was. How she had somehow recovered a very sad early childhood, become an incredibly loving, very motherly person, and had cared for all these, not only 10 that she took to South Africa, but in time there were about 18 children staying with her in South Africa. And it sounds like she loved every moment of it. Well, starting in about 1980, I had a chance to go along with my husband Robert to Kenya, where he was involved in the forest industry there, or forestry. And I realized quite quickly that I didn't want to be an expatriate wife sitting by a pool drinking martinis. So I came home and I wrote an application for a grant and got some money that would take me back and forth 2 times a year. And so I started a study there on the question, what happens when neither the teacher nor the pupils know or can speak or read or write the language of instruction, which was English there at that time. So I did that for about 3 years with a couple of other people that I met in Kenya. And we went to rural schools, we went to urban schools, we sat in a lot of classrooms just watching what happened. So that was the first step, first study. And then it went from there to another study in another country, Zimbabwe, and from there to South Africa, and then from there to Namibia, with basically the same question being asked everywhere I went. What happens when the language of instruction is an issue? Well, the difference was that I learned to write when I was writing Marjorie's journey, and I don't think I knew how to write. But with Marjorie's journey, I really had to shift gears from that academic mode to trying to be a bit creative and warm. In academia, you don't put yourself into the story, but in Marjorie's story, I was encouraged, particularly by one good friend of mine, to put myself in there and to to realize that, yeah, it was also at least a little bit about me, since it was about my grandparents and my mother's history in Aberdeen and all that. Chapter 6 begins with 3 weeks on the Winchester Castle, which was the name of the ship. The first night at sea, I was dozing in my bunk when I was startled to hear a big bang. I rushed out to the passageway thinking I would hear the alarm bells. I met an elderly steward and told him I thought I'd heard a big bang. There was no bang, madam, just you go back to sleep. So that was the first night on the ship. It was later they discovered, or she heard, that on the first night they had been followed by a submarine, and it had forced the ship to zigzag its way through, but they were safe. We were hardly in our, this was the first night, we were hardly in our cabins when we were called to the lounge for boat drill in case of air or submarine attack. The purser called out, "Women without children go to the left of the lounge. Women with children go to the right." So to the right I went with the baby, that was Sandy, in my arms, and the 11 others streaming behind me. We were all issued with life jackets, the old-fashioned cork things with straps. The purser said, "You must learn to put your child's life jacket on in half a minute." I thought that by the time we got all this family fastened up and the baby strapped on my back, it would take about 15 minutes. I looked across to where the women without children were assembled and saw a lot of big strapping girls in khaki uniforms and said to Nanny, they had a nanny with them, "Perhaps they are our answer." It took all my courage to approach the leader, Mrs. Juta, as she was huge with an Eton crop, big enormous feet and a booming voice. I explained my predicament, and she said, "Of course, my dear," and called out numbers 5, 4, 8, 10. "Go with this young woman and do whatever she asks." I returned to Nanny in triumph with all these stalwart girls behind me, and each girl took a child. I kept the baby. So the children were thrilled with their lady soldiers and used to boast, "My lady soldier is bigger than yours." The girls were wonderful. In their off-duty time, they would come to play with the children. Now I'll pause there for a minute and say that one of the things I discovered was who this Miss Juta was. I looked her up, and one of the mysteries that I solved was to find this Miss Juta, who was the head of this ambulance corps on its way through the ocean down to South Africa and then to East Africa. And I discovered that she, Miss Juta, had written an autobiography, and I got hold of that and found that it was she who confirmed the date of the voyage from Glasgow and the name of the ship. So that was just one little thing that I sought to find out and did so through a very circuitous kind of route. Arrival in Cape Town in Chapter 7. And Marjorie said, "Imagine my joy when I awoke about 5 a.m. the morning we reached Cape Town and felt the ship was still. Our blackout had been removed the night before, and I rushed to the porthole to look out, and there in full view was that huge and beautiful Table Mountain, so solid and so still. I was so excited that I woke Fiddle, who was in my cabin, and carried him over to the porthole and said, 'Now tell me what you see out there.' After a little pause, he said, 'I see a seagull been sick.' 'Well,' I said, 'look again, Fitz.' Another pause. 'Oh, it done it again.' I gave up after that and put him back in his bunk. I am still trying to find sausages as good as the ones we burnt under the oak tree. I remember the taste of fresh mealies, biltong, dark brown porridge, pumpkin fritters, coo jam, sticky slabs of honeycomb toffee.